everyone, my name's Amy and I read a lot. Today I want to talk to you about books that I had to read for class that I hated. I am sure a lot of us have had this experience, especially if you are studying literature like I have been for my entire academic career. You get put in a class, you start to read a book that you're assigned, you have to read it for school, and it sucks. And it's not a good book, and you hate it, and then you have to go into class and either pretend that you liked it in an attempt to kiss up to your professor who chose this book, or you have to say you hate it, which is sometimes the popular opinion and sometimes the unpopular opinion. So this happens all the time to English majors. Like constantly we end up reading books that we hate, and sometimes we don't finish them. But the books that I'm going to talk to you guys about today, I finished all of them. I sludged through these entire books, so I know that they are bad from beginning to end, no question. A couple of these I don't own, because when my shelves get full, the first thing to go is the book I don't like. The first book I want to talk about is The Scarlet Letter. I read this book in high school, like a lot of you, and I hated it, like a lot of you. It's not a particularly good work, in my opinion. I don't think that the quality of the literature pardons the crappiness of the content, I suppose. It's basically like a whole novel full of slut-shaming, and that's just not fun for me to read. I get that it's a product of its time, and there's a time and a place, and I get that stuff like this may or may not have really happened. Obviously, we're learning new historical information all the time, so it's kind of hard to say how accurate these historical novels are, but man, this one, it just taught me that I never want to be a Puritan. It taught me that people have always been douchebags about women getting pregnant outside of wedlock. I don't remember much of this novel. I think I've blocked it out because there's a lot of good books out there that I'd rather save room for. Definitely one of my least favorite novels I had to read for class. Next up, we have a novel called Hot Milk. I read this book for the Man Booker class that I took. If you've watched my other videos, you've heard about that class a little bit. Basically, it was essentially shortlisted for the British version of the Pulitzer Prize. It got nominated for a big fancy book prize, and it wasn't good. The writing tried too hard. It's one of those books that was trying to be poetic and fell short, and the trying was very obvious. Also, it had a character who was 26 years old, was an only child, just graduated from grad school, studied anthropology. It's a character I should have been able to relate to, right? Like, we have a lot of things in common, and yet she didn't seem real to me at all. I don't know anybody like this woman. I don't know a single millennial out there who's anything like the main character in this book. I don't know anybody who's like her mom, thankfully. And it was just weird and surreal, and you could never tell what was reality and what was something the character was hallucinating. And that's fine in some novels, but it didn't work for this one. I slogged my way through it. I'm really glad it was short, because it was a trial, and it was just not a good book, unfortunately. Another one of my least favorite books is a book called Johnny Got His Gun. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this one. It's a famous novel set post-war. This man was in a battle, and he lost all of his limbs. All of his limbs, and his ability to speak or see. He was blind, and he couldn't speak, and all of his limbs were gone. So he's just laying in this bed, and the whole novel takes place from his perspective. And the worst thing about this is it's based on a true story. This really happened to somebody, and that's horrible. And the novel was super, super depressing and just kind of ruined your soul a little bit. So while I understand the value of this novel as a whole, and I understand that it's based on a true story, it's soul-sucking, and I would not make my worst enemy read it because it was a bummer. If you watched my video on books that I hate, this was on there. It's called All That Man Is by David something or other. I refuse to learn how to pronounce his last name because I don't like him. And soon I hope I'll be done talking about this book forever, but it's my least favorite book of all time. I had to read it for class. It was awful. Just to recap, because I don't want to repeat myself too much bashing this book that deserves it, but still. It is a collection of short stories about a bunch of whiny white dudes who treat women really horribly, and the writing's not good. So like, just don't waste your time. Just trust me on this one. I also want to tell you about this novel I read called Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. I read it for this super, super cool class called Novels into Films. So we would read a novel, and then we'd watch the film, compare and contrast the two, and write a paper. And sometimes our professors brought food that coincided with the movies, which was amazing. It was so good. I loved that class. And I'm still to this day a big fan of reading a novel, then going straight out and watching the film and analyzing them, because it was really cool and it was really fun. But this one was a miss for me. There's a scene in it involving drilling and dentistry that I can't talk to you about because it'll make me sick. It was so awful. I have a fear of the dentist, so maybe it's just me who really, really hated this scene, but cringeworthy. And the novel was kind of back and forth. I had a weird ending. I just didn't enjoy it. It was just all over the place. The movie was fine, and it was cool because it talked about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which is something that I'm kind of interested in learning about. I think it's fascinating, but that novel is not the way I would go about it. I would not recommend it. And finally, we have my nemesis, Moby Dick. I hate this book. I hate this book. I read it when I was a grad student, which is good because if I read it as an undergrad, like, I don't know if I would have made it through the program, because if this was what I was going to have to do, I couldn't do it. It's so long. It is so long. And I don't think Herman Melville is a good author. A lot of people say he's the best American author. Lies. Don't listen to them. He is... He's bad. He rambles. There's a whole chapter about just like whale anatomy, and most of it's not even, you know, accurate by modern day standards. And he starts off with a plot, then he loses the plot somewhere in the middle, then he finds the plot again around all the whale stuff. There's this really strange chapter where like they're like digging their hands through like whale fluid, and it gets like weirdly erotic for a book about dead whale bodies. I mean, there's some weird stuff in here, and I just think that Herman Melville, the man needed a better editor, because there's some good stuff in here. I'm not gonna lie. There's some good chapters. There's some really good sentences. There's some good characters. But it's so buried underneath this man's weird obsession with whales that it's not even worth it. It's not worth it. Don't read this one unless you're forced to, like I was, because it might make you sound smart to say that you read Moby Dick, but I don't think the pretentiousness really justifies the means that you have to go through to be able to say you read this novel. It is bad. This copy's pretty, so it's going to stay on my shelf because I have a thing for pretty books. You don't need to read it. It's okay. You don't have to read the bad book. You don't have to read Moby Dick unless your professor says so, in which case, Godspeed, friends, because it is a doozy. Those are some novels that I had to read for class that I hated. Hopefully that's the last time we're going to talk about All That Man Is, because, I mean, drug that book through the mud as much as I can think of, and it deserves it, but we'll stop. Let me know if you guys have any suggestions for videos, if you have any questions, whatever, just comment below. I'm here. I will answer them. And I will also leave links to my other social media if you're interested in seeing some book photos, reviews, and whatnot. And otherwise, I will see you guys soon. Bye!